What is going on, everybody? What is going on, the Catch fam? My name is John Dawson, and in today's video we are going through my early 2022 fantasy football rankings for the tight end position. This video will go over a top 15 ranking at the position moving into the 2022 fantasy football season. If you do enjoy today's content, be sure to hit that like button down below, hit that subscribe button. If you are new to the channel, come join the Catch family and feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I will have my early quarterback and wide receiver rankings linked down below as well if you guys want to check those out. But without further ado, let's hop right into today's video. All right, number one overall, I've got Travis Kelce. And guys, this is a really tough decision for me. I essentially have Kelce and Andrews tied, but at the moment I'm giving a slight nod to Travis Kelce. It's really tough. Please let me know in the comments down below. Are you guys leaning towards Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews at this point in the off season? Let's start with Travis Kelce. He came in at tight end 2 in PPR and standard scoring formats last season. Just another monster, extremely consistent year for Travis Kelce. 134 targets, 92 receptions, just over 1,100 receiving yards, and 9 total touchdowns. Listen, guys, moving into 2022, we know that Tyreek Hill is no longer part of the Kansas City Chiefs. Travis Kelce is your bona fide number one target for Patrick Mahomes on this offense without a doubt. And the reason I'm giving Kelce a slight nod over Mark Andrews is because I believe in the Chiefs offense slightly more and in their passing game as a whole a little bit more overall than I do the Baltimore Ravens. So it's really close. But I think at the end of the day, taking Kelce as your tight end 1 overall makes a little bit more sense just because he's Patrick Mahomes' number 1 option. It's not a knock whatsoever on Lamar Jackson's capabilities, but I just think that overall, looking between the two offenses, I would personally rather have Travis Kelce. So like I said, let me know in the comments down below, guys. Are you guys leaning towards Kelce or Mark Andrews as your tight end 1 at this point in the off season? All right, moving back to Mark Andrews very quickly. Obviously, your tight end 1 last season, just an incredible year for Mark Andrews. Such a big leap forward in 2021, 154 targets. And don't forget, not all of those came from Lamar Jackson. We saw a couple of QBs hanging around last season with those injuries to Jackson, but 107 receptions, over 1,300 receiving yards, and 9 touchdowns. Guys, just an extremely monster season. I think the argument for Kelce is very similar to the argument for Mark Andrews, so I don't want to get that twisted. Mark Andrews is without a doubt Lamar Jackson's number 1 option in this offense with Hollywood Brown gone to the Cardinals. So don't get me wrong, I like Mark Andrews quite a bit. I think that Jackson is going to target him consistently throughout the season, but I just will give the Chiefs a slight nod in terms of a passing game advantage and a slight nod with having more receivers available on that offense to take some pressure off of Travis Kelce, where with Mark Andrews, you basically got Rashad Bateman and you've got Duvernay. And other than that, I'm not feeling very good. I mean, you got a plethora of running backs to maybe take some passing game work, but I really think they're going to be utilized more in the running game than obviously Lamar Jackson. You could argue is a run-first quarterback, not that he can't throw the football. So I don't know. When you put things together, I just think that Kelce gets a slight nod. Let me know down below if you guys are leaning towards Kelce or Andrews. Definitely a difficult decision moving into the 2022 fantasy football season. All right, number 3 overall, I've got Kyle Pitts, who in his rookie season finished as tight end 6 in PPR. It is semi-notable that he was tight end 9 in standard scoring formats. His worst statistic of the year, hands down, was just 1 score on the season, but outside of that, had 110 targets, 68 receptions, and just over 1,000 receiving yards. At the end of the day, a very good season for Kyle Pitts, a very good rookie season as well. The offense really wasn't that dynamic. I mean, outside of Cordero Patterson and Russell Gage coming on the end of the season, this was a really bad year for the Falcons, and unfortunately in 2022, I think they're going to have another really difficult season. You got Marcus Mariota at the quarterback position, who definitely favors the tight end position, had some great seasons earlier on in his career with Delaney Walker, but at the same time, it's a much different time in his career for Marcus Mariota, so I'm still a little bit worried, but I do think that is a slight advantage for Kyle Pitts as a whole. I love the addition of Drake London to this offense. I love the trade for Bryan Edwards as well. I love the draft selection of Tyler Algier. Cordell Patterson will still play a nice role within this offense. All things said and done, at the end of the day, Kyle Pitts is your #1 option, in my opinion, in the receiving game for this offense. He's just far too talented to ignore, even with the addition of Drake London. With the number of targets he got last season, I think that number is only going to improve in his sophomore season. So I like him a lot more in full PPR scoring formats and even half PPR, don't get me wrong. And I'll just give him the nod with that nice upside as such a young tight end in comparison to some of the other guys on this list. So I like Kyle Pitts comfortably at #3 moving into the 2022 fantasy football season. #4, we've got George Kittle. At the moment, I think Kittle is an absolute steal where we're seeing going in mock drafts overall. Just so much upside involved with going out and drafting George Kittle. Don't get me wrong, guys. On a weekly basis, he does present some boomer bust potential. You look at weeks 12 through weeks 18 last season. Listen to this, man. In full PPR, 2.3, 39.6, 34.1, 15.3, but then 4.1, 4.5, and 6. Weeks 12 through week 18, and there's just so much differences in a 2-game performance and then a 39-point performance the next week. I mean, there's definitely boomer bust, but at the end of the day, Kittle played 14 games last season and still came in as tight end 4. So I'm very comfortable putting him as tight end 4 moving into 2022. 95 targets last season, 71 receptions, just over 900 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. If he did play a full season, he could have easily finished a lot higher overall in rankings last season. So I like Kittle at tight end 4, and I think he's a really good value where you can go out and get him, because some fantasy managers are still worried about injuries lingering and that boomer bust potential. But what you can't deny is that he is easily one of the best tight ends in the whole league. Regardless of who's throwing him the football next season, he's going to be the face of that offense. Even if Debo plays, even if the run game continues to be strong, Kittle is your guy. He is what that offense moves through. So I love Kittle as my tight end 4 heading into the 2022 fantasy football season. At #5, we got Darren Waller, and a little bit of a revamped Raiders offense, a new head coach. You add Devontae Adams. Some fantasy managers a little bit spooked with Darren Waller with that addition to Devontae Adams, but I think that Waller will be just fine. Only played 11 games last season, 93 targets, 55 receptions, 665 receiving yards, and 2 scores. Where we'd like to see him improve in 2022 is more targets in the red zone. I am a little bit worried, don't get me wrong, with the addition of Adams and Renfrow really coming on last season, and potential running back committee starting to form with some of those running backs potentially getting some passing work as well. But overall, I like Waller at tight end 5 just because we know what he's capable of. I am a little bit spooked, I'm not going to lie, but I do think when you look at Waller, statistically speaking, he is a tight end that easily should be in the top 5. And when he gets the right targets in the right opportunities and when he's fully healthy, just go back to week 1 last season against Baltimore, where he had a lights out game, 19 targets, 10 receptions, 105 receiving yards, and a touchdown, 26.5 fantasy points in week 1 in full PPR last season. Those are the type of games that we're looking for out of Darren Waller. We need a fully healthy Waller, and I do think that the addition of Adams at times could help Waller in terms of being more open. Defense is having to focus more on Adams. You got Renfrow coming out of the slot. I mean, I just like the Raiders offense as a whole, and I think they're going to be in a good place in 2022. So I think that's very fair to put Waller as my tight end 5 heading in to the 2022 fantasy football season. All right, you guys knew it was coming. You guys know that I was going to have Dawson Knox way higher than other members of the fantasy community. Guys, I get it. I'm a little biased. I just love Dawson Knox as a fantasy prospect. I love him at the tight end position. I love the Bills offense. I love the chemistry that he's got with Josh Allen. I think he presents a lot of nice upside. Came in as your tight end 8 last season in full PPR through 15 games, 71 targets, 49 receptions, 587 receiving yards, and 9 scores. Don't get me wrong, a little bit touchdown dependent, but really from this tier forward, I feel like all these tight ends are relatively touchdown dependent, so it doesn't bother me. And if you are bullish on the Bills offense, which I know a lot of you guys are, then I think there's no reason to not consider Dawson Knox a top tight end to go out and target. I love him at his current ADP where you can go out and target him. I think he's going to have a fantastic 2022 fantasy football season, and I'm very, very confident putting him as my tight end 6 in my early rankings so far. All right, Dallas Goedert I've got at number 7 overall, a little bit higher than a lot of rankings out there as well. Came in as your tight end number 11 in full PPR last season. 76 targets, 56 receptions, 830 receiving yards, and 4 scores. I do think he'll have some opportunities to improve on that touchdown number and the total receptions and receiving yards as well. You add AJ Brown to this offense. I think Devonta Smith is a great wide receiver too, but I think that Goedert will play that role as a nice security blanket for Jalen Hurts. A lot of fantasy managers feel very good about Jalen Hurts and the Eagles offense moving into 2022. They've got a great run game. They've improved the defense through the draft as well. They had a phenomenal draft overall. So I like Goedert at 7 overall, and similar to Dawson Knox, I think he's a tight end 1 with a lot of upside who you can target at a very good ADP at this point in the off season. So I've got no problem whatsoever putting Goedert at number 7 overall moving into the 2022 fantasy football season. All right, number 8, I've got Dalton Schultz, who's maybe a little bit further back than some other rankings out there. Came in as your tight end 3 in PPR and standard last season. Had a phenomenal year. He was on my personal roster. It was a really nice, serviceable, consistent tight end last season. I do think he'll do the same in 2022. Last season, 104 targets, 78 receptions, 808 receiving yards, and 8 scores. Really started to come on as a big favorite in the red zone for Dak Prescott. So I still like Dalton Schultz. I think he's going to have a very consistent year. I think he's going to continue to be a nice target overall for Dak Prescott, especially in the red zone. I just think that Goedert and Knox and their offenses potentially present some more upside. But don't get me wrong, man, Schultz is falling back a little bit in drafts as well. And I think he's a very, very good tight end 1. I like him as my number 8 overall tight end just because, like I said, I think that Knox and Goedert offer a little bit more upside, but don't take that as a knock on Dalton Schultz. I think he's a perfectly fine tight end 1 moving into the 2022 fantasy football season. All right, number 9, we've got TJ Hockenson, who's easily one of the most talented tight ends on this entire list, but the worry with TJ Hockenson is the injuries over last season, especially that shoulder injury. But through 12 games total, had 84 targets, 61 receptions, 583 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns. Came in as your tight end number 15 in PPR scoring formats last season. So really, through 12 games, those are very, very good numbers. But outside of the injury concerns with me for Hockenson, he takes a little bit of a step back in my rankings because that wide receiving room has just gotten so crowded throughout the offseason. I mean, you've already got guys who were kind of slept on last season who weren't very consistent but had some good games like Khalif Raymond and Quentin Cephas. You add Josh Reynolds last season, who's got very good chemistry with Jared Goff. Then Amon-Ra St. Brown came in and his rookie season just lit it up. Then you add Jameson Williams. Plus DeAndre Swift is going to take some receiving work out of the backfield as well. So just a very crowded offense. I mean, the offensive line has improved in the offseason as well as the defense. I do think that the Lions are in a place to take a little bit of a step forward next season, but I just worry that Hockenson is going to lose some of that overall target share to some of those receivers. Don't get me wrong, though. I think he could become a really nice red zone option for Jared Goff. And I do think that the Lions are taking a nice step forward overall. But for me, between the injury concerns and the crowded receiving room, he takes a little bit of a step back in my overall rankings. But don't get me wrong, at his current ADP and the fact that we're seeing him start to fall back in fantasy drafts, I do think he could be a really nice value pick moving into 2022. And I've got him comfortably as my tight end 9 heading into the 2022 fantasy football season. All right, number 10 overall, I've got my guy Hunter Henry, who a lot of fantasy managers just seem to be sleeping on at this point in the offseason. Came in as your tight end 10 in PPR, tight end 8 in standard scoring formats last season. 75 targets, 50 receptions, 603 receiving yards, and 9 scores. Similar to Dawson Knox, you could argue that Hunter Henry is far too touchdown dependent, but I really think a lot of the guys from this tier forward are touchdown dependent in general. So I've got no problem with Hunter Henry, who, like I said, finished as tight end 10 last season. Coming in my rankings as tight end 10, really became a nice security blanket for Mac Jones and a favorite red zone target for Mac Jones last season. I think that Mac Jones will take a step forward in his sophomore season. Hunter Henry is going to be a big part of that. I've got no problem whatsoever with Hunter Henry being my 10th overall ranked tight end. I've got no problem with fantasy managers continuing to sleep on him because I think he's going to have a very good season in 2022. I love him at his current ADP. I've loved being able to go and draft him as my tight end 2 and add some stability and some depth to my roster at the position overall, especially if you're going for a guy like a George Kittle, maybe a TJ Hockenson, just someone who deals with a little bit more injury overall, and you want to go out and snag a tight end too. I think that Hunter Henry's perfect, but if you completely fumble at the position and you're able to snag Hunter Henry in those late rounds, or if you just want to target him as your tight end one because you have that faith in him, I've got no problem with that whatsoever. I think he's going to have a very productive season in 2022. All right, number 11 overall, I've got Zach Ertz, who you guys could definitely argue is a little bit further back on my list than he should be. Came in as your tight end 5 in PPR last season, moving from the Eagles to the Cardinals. Had 112 targets, 74 receptions, 763 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. He is locked up with the Cardinals for the next 3 years. A very, very consistent and very, very talented tight end in the league over the past couple of years. Just had an amazing run in Philly before kind of dealing with some injuries in 2020. And I think the change of scenery has been good for Zach Ertz. Some of the advantages that he has right now is that DeAndre Hopkins is set to miss the beginning of the season, serving that suspension. The Cardinals obviously did add Hollywood Brown at the receiving position, but outside of that, I mean, you got Rondo Moore with the potential to step up at the receiving position. They did go out and draft Trey McBride at the tight end position, obviously arguably the most talented tight end in the 2022 NFL draft. So there's some concern for fantasy managers there, but at the end of the day, I think that Ertz is still going to garner a ton of targets within that offense, even when Hopkins comes back. I like him as a nice security blanket and a red zone option for Kyler Murray as a whole, but I've got him just a little bit further back on the list just due to overall age, due to that offense maybe having some more options down the stretch, and due to the fact that they did go out and draft Trey McBride. But let me know in the comments if you guys think I've got Ertz too low. I just think some of the other options that I had listed before and present some better upside and or potential consistency. But overall, I'll put him as my tight end number 11 heading into the 2022 fantasy football season. And I do think he is a tight end you can go out and target who has a nice ADP right now. Could end up being a very valuable draft selection heading into the 2022 fantasy football season. At number 12, we got my guy, Mike Gesicki, who came in as your tight end 9 in full PPR last season, tight end 12 in standard scoring formats last season. 112 targets from not just Tua, but you also had Brissett sprinkled in there. 73 receptions, 780 receiving yards, and 2 scores. Would have been a much different year in terms of final rankings if he could have found the red zone a little bit more or capitalized a little bit more on some of his red zone targets. I love Mike Gesicki, especially in full PPR. Had a little bit of a better first half of the season outside of week 1, where he gave you guys a true goose egg and myself a true goose egg with 0 points. Overall, a consistent tight end. What I like for Mike Gesicki heading into 2022 is a little bit of a revamped offense. I think that's going to be more difficult for defenses to put that pressure on Mike Gesicki with Tyreek Hill and Ced Wilson within that offense, and a plethora of new running backs. And then the head coaching change I like for Mike Gesicki. Obviously, McDaniels really favored George Kittle being a huge part of the Niners offense. I think that he will also favor Mike Gesicki being a big part of the Dolphins offense in 2022. So I think that he's a steal in fantasy football drafts right now. He's really sliding back to the end of the draft. And he's a tight end that I'm comfortable making my tight end 1. I do think that he could improve on some of his numbers from last season. But overall, I think he's definitely a lock for a top 15 tight end who could move in to the top 10 as well with that revamped offense. So I'll put him comfortably as my tight end 12 moving into the 2022 fantasy football season. All right, number 13 overall, I've got my guy, Pat Freiermuth. So if you guys followed the channel last offseason, I was tooting the horn for Pat Freiermuth all the way through the preseason. Just showed that really nice chemistry with Ben Roethlisberger in some of those preseason games. Took him a little bit to really get going within the offense, but he represents exactly what a Pittsburgh Steelers tight end should look like. And I'm not necessarily too worried about the change at the quarterback position, whether it's Mitchell Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, who we see as the starter, or if we see both at different points throughout the season. No disrespect to Ben Roethlisberger whatsoever, but he wasn't necessarily playing as a top-tier quarterback in his final season, but still showed that really nice chemistry with Pat Freiermuth. So I think the question is with Freiermuth, can he establish that same chemistry with Trubisky and or Pickett? But I think even if he doesn't, he could still easily finish as a top 15 tight end, just because, like I said, it's not like the passing game was extremely dynamic for the Steelers last season. He came in as your tight end 13 in full PPR last season, so I'm comfortable with them as tight end 13 overall. Through 16 games last season, had 79 targets, 60 receptions, 497 receiving yards, but really made up for all those numbers with 7 touchdowns total. Had a really nice second half, mid-season to second half of the year. So I like Freiermuth. I think he's moving in the right direction as a young tight end, and he could make a big leap in his sophomore season. But I do think the question mark at the quarterback position, and maybe with the offense as a whole, especially moving into a run-first potential offense who also relies on the defense, I've got Pat Freiermuth comfortably at number 13 moving into the 2022 fantasy football season. Number 14 overall, I've got Robert Tonyan of the Green Bay Packers. A phenomenal lights-out season in 2020 through 16 games, 59 targets, 52 receptions, 586 receiving yards, and 11 scores. He was tied with Travis Kelce in 2024, the most touchdowns for the season. Obviously, a very disappointing year in 2021. If you guys followed the channel last season, Tonyan was one of my favorite tight end targets heading into 2021. Obviously, he did get hurt, only played 8 games, but still, even before he was injured, he's having an incredibly disappointing season. 29 targets, 18 receptions, 204 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns through 8 games. Just a disappointing year between the injury and his performance overall. Only had 2 games where he did have double-digit fantasy games, and both of those games obviously came when he did score a touchdown last season. So definitely touchdown dependent at this point, but I think the advantage to Tonyan is Devontae Adams' departure from the Packers and the ultimate lack at the receiving position, although I do think that they're going to piece things together within that offense. But I think that Tonyan is going to be a big part of that. Obviously, he does have that early chemistry with Aaron Rodgers already. I think that they can easily reestablish that. So you're taking a little bit of a risk if you go out and target Robert Tonyan. I like him a little bit more as a tight end too, to any of the other guys that we named already today. But if you completely fumble at the position, then I'm fine with taking a risk on Robert Tonyan. And I do think that he could be a big part of the Packers offense and a huge target throughout the season for Aaron Rodgers as well. So I like him as a little bit of a sleeper pick, and I've got him pretty comfortably at number 14 overall moving into the 2022 fantasy football season. Okay, you guys knew it was coming. You guys knew that I had to talk about Noah Fant in my early tight end rankings. And I get it, guys. Okay, the Seahawks do not look like the sexiest fantasy team on paper whatsoever. But just hear me out. The quarterback situation doesn't really change for Noah Fant. He has primarily played with Drew Lock throughout his career, although we saw some Teddy Bridgewater sprinkled in there and whatnot. I mean, Lock's had better times than others, but at the end of the day, he's back with his quarterback in Seattle. I get that this offense as a whole doesn't look great on paper. The receiving room is fine between Metcalf and Lockett. The running back room, I do think, is going to be able to step up between Rashad Penny and Kenneth Walker, but the offensive line is a huge concern, and that defense is not going to really do them any favors. At least I don't think so. But in the day, okay, hear me out. This was a tight end 12 last season in PPR, 90 targets overall, 68 receptions, 670 receiving yards, and 4 scores. And just think of it this way. I mean, for the past 2 seasons, really since Noah Fant's rookie season, he has been a tight end in rankings heading into the fantasy football season who people have considered a top 10 at the position. And I get that Seattle doesn't look great from an offensive standpoint, but really over the last 2 seasons, Denver hasn't necessarily looked great from an offensive standpoint either. And he has the same quarterback who he had before. So I just think that there's a fair argument for Noah Fant to easily finish within the top 15 and to really be a huge, not only target for Drew Lock, but a security blanket as well. And even if we see another quarterback become the QB1, which is entirely possible with Drew Lock as the number 1 option, even if it's Geno Smith, man, I really think that Noah Fant can be a big part of this offense. And just don't forget that even bad offenses can produce good fantasy football players. So I'm comfortable with Noah Fant as my tight end 15. And I think that he's going to potentially offer some nice stability at the position and some really nice draft value where you can go out and draft him at the moment. Don't get me wrong, I like him more as a tight end 2, or if you just completely fumble at the position and you need to pick up a tight end in those later rounds, I like where you can currently draft him. I think he's worth the risk. I think he could easily finish within the top 15, so I'm happy to have him as my 15th overall tight end for our early 2022 fantasy football rankings. And that'll do it for today's video, man. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought of our early 2022 fantasy football rankings for the tight end position. Who did I have too high? Who did I have too low? Who is not on the top 15? Who should have been? And feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. Hit that like button if you did enjoy today's content, and please consider subscribing down below. Come join the Catch fam on the road to 1 1,000 subscribers. We put out free daily fantasy football content, and at the moment we are running a free subscriber mock draft almost every single night. Be sure to join our Discord page down below to get updates on when we are drafting. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening, and remember, you saw it here on The Catch.